Assalamualaikum and welcome to the next part for report writing. So now we'll be looking at editing and proofreading, which is basically the final part of your report writing process. But first, let's look at some of the reasons why reports tend to fail for students. Now, one of the main reasons is that the overall message of the report is actually not clear. So this could be an issue of language or it could be an issue of content, but basically the purpose of the report tends to be a bit blurry for the tutor, and that's why the report ends up failing in the end. Second big reason is the structure of the report is not as recommended. So for example, there's no logical sequence and the flow of ideas doesn't really make sense. So you have to make sure you adhere to the structures provided for you in previous lectures. Another reason that reports tend to be too long, and also language used may be inappropriate, particularly in terms of the style, which you must conform to the academic style. Another not so common reason, but is certainly possible, is that the report is boring and so does not engage the reader. You have to try and make sure that the report is one that the reader will want to continue reading from the get-go. And also another common reason is that it tends to be full of spelling and grammatical mistakes. So editing and proofreading will hopefully help to remove these reasons and therefore result in an effective and successful report. So some common feedback from tutors. One is that students don't read the instructions carefully, and so they don't actually address what is asked of them. So make sure you read and reread and keep the question of the report in mind as you are writing and going through your own report. Another common reason is the poor use of English and expressions in English makes it difficult to understand what the students actually mean. So you have to make sure that you are as precise as possible and that you adhere to grammatical conventions and academic style. Another is that students may overanalyze and conclude more than is reasonable from one experiment. So keep in mind that the experiment or the research that you are conducting is not a particularly extensive one. So try not to go overboard and just address the objectives that you have provided in the beginning. But also don't underanalyze and state the obvious. We want you to come up with a conclusion that is worthy of the study that you conducted, not something that you can immediately think of by just looking at the question and immediately coming up with an answer. And finally, the student's ability to write coherently in the required style is often the major problem. So see, these are some of the more common complaints from tutors about report writing from students. So some more common mistakes. First of all, the use of colloquial language. So don't use short forms unless it's part of a quotation. Avoid colloquial expressions, phrasal verbs, and idioms. Try not to use simplistic vocabulary. A simple example is experts say they think this is bad. So the use of say, the use of they, the use of think, and the use of bad, these are all simplistic vocabulary that you need to try to avoid in academic style. Try not to write in a series of short sentences such as the following. Also, don't use very emotional language. Don't express personal opinions too strongly, so make sure you utilize academic caution in your writing. Don't overgeneralize, again, academic caution. Don't refer blindly to statistics without accurate reference to their source, so make sure you cite appropriately using the APA reference style. Don't use cliches. For example, Rome was not built in a day. It does not have a place in academic writing. Don't use personal examples either. Now, in terms of writing style, of course, you must be clear and concise and make sure that you yourself understand what you're trying to say, because if you don't, then you'll probably never be able to convey that clearly to the reader. Don't overcomplicate your sentences and include details that don't need to be there. Make sure each sentence fulfills its purpose in informing the readers only what they need to know. Avoid use of jargon. And try to vary the length of your sentences in trying to make your writing more readable and easier to understand as well. And finally, aim for one clear point per sentence. So this is connected to the third point, where you don't overcomplicate your sentences or fill it up with unnecessary points. Now, one tip for writing style is if you try to extract the first line from your report paragraphs and see if you can follow your main line of argument. So what you can try to do is to provide the first line of your paragraphs to a friend or a second set of eyes and see if they can follow your line of thought. And if they can't, then it's clear that your report is not so easy to follow and that you may want to be clearer and more detailed in your topic sentences. So some editing tips. So we'll look at the content that you should be reviewing as you're editing or proofreading your report. One, start with a method section. So make sure all of the important pieces of information are included. Next, you may want to work on the results section. So make sure that results are clearly presented and properly interpreted and easily understood by the reader as well. Third, complete the introduction. So make sure you underline or emphasize the importance or significance of the topic that you've chosen. Check that you've got proper referencing for literature reviews and any citations you've included. And of course, proper referencing style, which is APA for this particular module. Next, you may want to tidy up the discussion to mirror the introduction. So you have to make sure that the discussion can be directly linked or tied in with what you mentioned in the introduction. So ensure that the report ends with a thorough and in-depth discussion which can be related to the other parts of your report. So again, about editing, all writing is rewriting. So what this means is that do not be content with your first draft of your writing. You need to look it over and make sure that you've addressed all that needs to be addressed and that it's been proofread properly and all the grammar is appropriate, the style is appropriate, and everything is where it should be. So yes, you need to draft and redraft. It may help to number and date your draft so that you are sure that you are going to submit the final version of your writing. It may help to read aloud. Whatever your eyes may have missed can probably be heard by your ears if you were to read aloud. So it helps in the final drafting process for you to slowly read aloud through your report to catch any mistakes you may have made. Now try to cut unnecessary words and phrases. You want to be as least wordy as possible, particularly in academic reports, because it has to be very straight to the point. So similar to that, delete unnecessary adjectives. Again, in academic writing, it's not really appropriate to have these types of words. For example, helpful tips or terrible tragedy, which is kind of redundant. And again, delete unnecessary adverbs, which don't do much to describe what needs to be described. So another thing to ask yourself is whether each paragraph contains one main theme. So it could be helpful to jot down some notes in the margin of your paper. For instance, in one paragraph, is there only one main topic? So if the paragraph contains more than one main idea, then you will have to divide it. So make sure each paragraph only contains one key point. Now, some of the things that you need to think about for proofreading. Again, it may help to read aloud slowly to catch any mistakes you may have made. Check the hierarchy of your headings, so make sure that they're appropriately structured and appropriately numbered. Check paired items such as brackets and speech marks. This seems like a small thing, but it really helps to show that you have been meticulous in your proofreading. Check that your type font is consistent, especially since you'll be doing your reports in groups. Of course, check your grammar and use of English. Make sure your punctuation is consistent. And also check that abbreviations are either fully explained or accurate. So that brings us to the end of editing and proofreading. We'll be moving on to another topic next week. Until then, good luck.